My name is Melina Laboucan-Massimo, and I come from the Lubicon Cree First Nation, which is in northern Alberta in Canada. And I work with the Indigenous Environmental Network, and I also work as a climate and energy campaigner for Greenpeace Canada.
Okay, and
It's too loud? Too not loud?
no, yeah, they're good. Can you tell me what brought you to Cancun?
I came to Cancun to bring the message of why Indigenous, okay, let me start that again. I came to Cancun to talk about why and how Indigenous peoples are impacted by fossil fuel extraction, but also at the same time Indigenous peoples are impacted on the receiving end of climate change, and how these two are inextricably linked to each other, and how governments of the world need to reduce their carbon emissions and take it seriously and not just actually play lip service to making agreements that aren't actually legally binding and actually doing something about it and having real solutions put forward. And that's why I came here, to push those types of solutions forward.
Can you give me a tar sands for dummies?
Sure. Tar sands is the fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. It currently accounts for up to 40 million tons of CO2 emissions a year, which is bigger than entire countries. As a project alone, it produces more than entire countries does. So it's a very problematic project. It's one of the biggest industrial projects on the face of the planet. It also is home to many Indigenous peoples in the northern part of Alberta. And the area that we're talking about spans 140,000 square kilometers. So we're talking about an area that's bigger than England and Wales combined. So we're talking about, a huge landmass. And on top of that, there's a lot of detrimental effects happening to the people that live there in regards to water pollution, air contamination, and also destruction of the last remaining pristine boreal forest in the world, which is a huge carbon sink. And that's being destroyed for fossil fuel development.
And what kinds of impacts are First Nations in that area feeling?
There is a variety of different impacts, from human health concerns, elevated rates of cancers, increased respiratory illnesses, as well as a violation of Aboriginal treaty rights, which is very problematic. It's a right protected under Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, and these rights are being violated because the government of Canada and the Alberta government is allowing companies, international conglomerates, to come into traditional territories and essentially destroy and contaminate these, pristine watersheds, as well as the boreal forest, which is home to a whole host of other, it's a full-fledged ecosystem, and it's being destroyed. And on top of that, Indigenous peoples aren't able to live in a sustainable and traditional way, and that also affects our cultural and spiritual practices and values.
If there was one thing you'd want the whole world to know about this and what's happening, what would it be?
I would say, we're at the end of the Earth's limits in which we're able to live this way. Constantly consuming fossil fuels is going to be the detriment to humanity. And when you come back to where our families live, where my family lives, and you see the firsthand destruction of the Earth, it's very intimately linked to the globe, like the global crisis that we find ourselves in. So that we're all a part of the problem, but we're also a part of the solution. And we all need to take seriously the issues of climate change. Even if we're not being impacted immediately, we will be impacted in the near future. And I think it's important to take note from people that are being on the front lines and being impacted now and today, and to heed people's cause for concern and warnings about what will happen in the future.
So people are being affected by climate change now?
People are being affected by climate change now. Every year, 300,000 people die from climate change. A million more are made refugees. And, it's just a matter of time before people will be affected worldwide.
Do you think that there's a lesson in, Indigenous cultures for the first and developed world of, how to do this right?
I think industrialized countries have definitely lost their connection to the earth and where we get our life from and where we get our sustenance from. The fact that we actually need to live in harmony, in equilibrium, in balance with the earth, and we're not living in balance with the earth right now. And I think Indigenous peoples are the way that our foundational understandings and worldview of the world is that, we're a part of the earth. We belong to the earth. The earth doesn't actually belong to us. We're one of the many species that lives on the earth, and we're also very dependent on the earth for clean water, clean air, all of these things that we need for our own survival. And the fact that we're not looking after that and not being proper caretakers is a problem, and that's actually why Indigenous peoples have been saying for a very long time that we need to continue to care after Mother Earth, and we need to listen to what's happening and what she's saying right now. And right now, she's very sick. Right now, the way that we're treating the earth is going to be a detriment to ourselves. And it's very upsetting to see the fact that people don't care sometimes, and people don't really take note. I think when you're very close to the land, if you're a land-based community, and you can see, the immediate ramifications of, fossil fuel extraction, and then you know what the ramifications are. You know that it's not clean. Driving around in your car, it's one thing, but seeing the extraction sites is another, and seeing what kind of legacy that leaves in communities is something that needs to be noted. And we also, it's not just an isolated effect, it's a global effect.
And how do you think we can turn this around?
Well, what we've been pushing for is a recognition of the rights of Mother Earth. We've also been pushing for respect and inclusion of Indigenous people's rights and perspectives within, processes like the UNFCCC to ensure that the understanding of how fundamentally we are destroying and desecrating the earth will, in the end, impact us all. And so we're also pushing for the Cochabamba People's Agreement to be upheld internationally, because it was agreed upon over 35,000 people across 40 countries, including official delegates. And so I think it needs to be taken note that people that are from impacted communities that are on the front line of the, being impacted by these problems are also on the front line of what the solutions need to be.
It seems like some of the solutions need to come not just from, policy, they need to come from a moral place. We need to sort of shift in that direction.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of greed in this world. I think a lot of people have this construct that capitalism is somehow the end-all be-all, that, and it's based on a concept that we're constantly consuming. It's okay to consume, and not think about, what we're wasting, not think about what kind of legacy we're leaving for our children. And I think that's very problematic in the respect that, just what we saw right now in the UNFCCC was the solution that we can use capitalism to solve the climate crisis, which ultimately is, I think it's a hoodwink. People don't realize that that's not how you solve a climate crisis. You actually reduce emissions globally. You actually have to put in check these corporations that are going around violating people's rights, and also violating, international conventions under Kyoto Protocol that says that we need a reduction soon and now. And that's not happening, because we're going to allow people to buy carbon credits, and that's not going to actually fundamentally shift what needs to be shifted. What needs to be shifted is a reduction of all fossil fuel development across the world. And that's not happening because of things like carbon credits and market-based mechanisms that aren't the solution, they're false solutions.
Where do you find hope in all this?
That's a hard question sometimes. Some days are good and sometimes are bad. Some days I see, I think of future generations. Like if I were to have children one day, I would like for them to have the ability to grow up in an environment that's clean, in a place that they are free to practice their traditions and their culture. And also, I think about the future, of where we want to go to. What kind of vision is that? And my vision isn't the same vision that a lot of world leaders have, and I think that's changing, slowly but surely, that a lot of other people are starting to see the world in different ways, and that it's not based on these false concepts of these nation states that have to basically violate people's rights to have a just world, and it's just, they don't go hand in hand. We need to live in a world that respects human rights, that respects the rights of Mother Earth, and that also eventually results in a clean, sustainable living situation for all people. And that means turning away from a fossil fuel-based paradigm and going towards a renewable energy-based paradigm, and one that's, you know, more dependent on solar energy or wind energy. And we need to start investing in those now and not later when, you know, we don't really have much of an environment left to live in.
It seems like we built a system that's sort of doomed to fail. You know, like even if we, you know, sequester carbon and turn some of these, you know, some of these small paths of destruction that we're talking about around, we're still not going to have any, you know, any fish, any rainforests, any reefs. Like what can people do to help turn this around?
A lot more people need to rise up. A lot more people need to start taking action, putting pressure on their respective governments. People need to realize that, you know, not just a certain few can do this work for them. It needs to be more than, you know, a number of hardworking people that are doing work and, you know, working day in and day out. It needs to be all people that are putting pressure on governments and international systems like the UN, but also making change within their own communities, whether that be, you know, having their own sustainable farms, whether that be trying to get more investment in having an off-the-grid system of energy for their communities, whether that be living in more sustainable ways. There's a lot of different ways that people can start making this shift without having to wait for, you know, world governments to do that, because we need to be doing that on the ground first and foremost.
Bolivia was talking, you know, down with capitalism. You know, system needs to change. Are you in line with that line of thinking, or do you think we can fix it within the current framework?
Well, I think I heard a quote, and I can't remember who the quote is right now, who said it, but it's kind of funny, and I think it just shows that a lot of people can see the end of the world, but a lot of people can't see the end of capitalism. You know, and the fact that people are constantly trying to stay in this paradigm that's based on a constant consumption of, and that's what capitalism is. It's always, you know, increasing productivity, increasing consumption, increasing demand, increasing supply. So that's not how we need to be living. We need to be recycling. We need to be, you know, and more than just recycling, but we need to be implementing a lot more effective and efficient solutions to the climate crisis and to, you know, all of these issues that we see in communities. And I think it just shows that people aren't able to psychologically make that shift yet, and I think that's very problematic. And it's very different, and I think that's why Indigenous peoples have been saying for a long time, like, you know, when Europeans first came to Canada or US, it was like, we can't sell you the land. There's no such thing as saying that this land belongs to us, and this is our plot. It's, you know, we belong to the earth. We don't belong. The earth doesn't belong to us. You know, and I think that's just very, like, it's a very contrast very much with the way that European kind of Western society thinks of what is ownership over land or, you know, resources or whatnot. And for us, we come from a lot more like kind of, I guess, reciprocal. Everything's based on a circle. You know, what goes around comes around, and like what we're doing right now is definitely going to come back and, you know, haunt us. It's going to be the detriment of humanity if we don't actually do something. So I think it's very important to take heed to a lot of prophecies that have, you know, there's prophecies that our people have had for you know, many years about, you know, a change of times where the medicines that would heal us will start harming us, you know, and we can see that through like contamination, the contamination of water, contamination of medicines, contamination of berries, contamination of the meat that we consume from the animals that live on the land. And I think it's, you know, very important to take note that there is a change of these times and we need to heed them.